I walked into First Midwest Bank, hoping to borrow $5,000 before the power company shut off my electricity. Less than an hour later, the branch manager closed his office door, looked me in the eye, and quietly said, "Mr. Mercer, our trust department shows you've been worth over $41 million for almost 8 years." I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because my mind refused to believe what I'd just heard. A week earlier, I would have called a story like that ridiculous. Instead, it became the beginning of the most unbelievable day of my life. My name is David Mercer. I was 58 that spring, living alone in an aging ranch house on the east side of Springfield, Missouri. The porch paint had long since peeled away, one shutter leaned crooked, and every time it rained, I slid the same bucket beneath the leak in my laundry room because replacing the roof wasn't an option. 5 years earlier, I lost my wife, Linda, to cancer. After she was gone, the house never sounded the same again. I stayed busy working as a maintenance supervisor at a manufacturing plant outside town. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept the bills paid. I repaired conveyor belts, swapped out burned motors, climbed ladders, and handled the jobs younger workers preferred to avoid. Then the company lost several overseas contracts. 3 months before I walked into that bank, management announced another round of layoffs. After 28 years, I was out the door in less than 10 minutes with a cardboard box and a handshake. At 58, finding another job wasn't impossible, but every interview ended the same way. They smiled, thanked me for coming, and talked about hiring someone with long-term growth potential. I knew exactly what they meant. My savings disappeared faster than I ever expected. The mortgage, utilities, insurance, blood pressure, medication, every bill kept arriving while nothing came in. That Monday morning, I stopped at Casey's on Glenstone Avenue like I always did. One small black coffee. Emily, the cashier, smiled as she filled the cup. "The usual? You know me too well." She handed it over and said, "Good luck today." I never told her where I was going. Maybe the worry was written all over my face. By the time I reached First Midwest Bank, the foreclosure notice folded inside my jacket felt heavier than it should have. The place looked exactly as it always had, the same brick walls, the same flower beds, the same American flag waving outside. I'd opened my first checking account there back in the 80s. A loan officer named Melissa greeted me. She looked no older than 35. "What can I help you with today, Mr. Mercer? I need a home equity loan." "How much?" $5,000. She gave me an encouraging smile. "Let's see what we can do." We went through my work history, income, house, and employment records. She typed quietly, asking routine questions until she entered my social security number. Her expression changed. She frowned at the screen, clicked a few more times, then looked back at me. "I'm sorry. Would you mind waiting a moment?" "Of course." She hurried into another office. I figured something had gone wrong with my credit file. An old address, maybe even identity theft. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Finally, an older man in a gray suit walked toward me. Mark Henderson, the branch manager, extended his hand. "Mr. Mercer, would you come with me?" His voice was steady, almost too careful. He led me into his office and quietly shut the door behind us. Then he picked up the phone. "Mr. Mercer is here." He listened for a moment. "Yes, his driver's license matches." Another pause. "Understood." When he hung up, he studied me with a look caught somewhere between concern and disbelief. "I'd like to verify a few things first." The next 20 minutes felt nothing like a loan interview. He asked for my grandfather's full name, Harold Mercer, my birth date, whether I'd ever served as trustee of a family estate, whether I'd received legal paperwork about a trust. Every answer was the same. "No, never. I've never heard of anything like that." With every response, the room grew quieter. Then his phone rang again. This time he pressed the speaker button. "Mr. Mercer, my name is Angela Brooks from our Trust Services Department in St. Louis," a woman said in a calm, reassuring voice. "We've completed your identity verification. I just have one final question. Did your grandfather, Harold Mercer, pass away in May of 2018? My chest tightened. "Yes. I'm sorry for your loss." A brief silence followed before she continued. "Mr. Mercer, You are listed as the sole lifetime beneficiary of the Harold Mercer Irrevocable Trust. I stared at the desk. I'm sorry. The what? The trust currently holds assets valued at approximately $41 million. The room went completely silent. For a second, I honestly wondered if I was having a stroke. Then I forced out a laugh. You've got the wrong David Mercer. We've verified your identity through multiple independent records. I shook my head. My electricity is about to be shut off. I understand. I'm here asking for a $5,000 loan. I understand. There's $318 in my checking account. I understand. Mr. Henderson quietly slid a box of tissues across his desk. I hadn't shed a tear, but he seemed convinced I might at any moment. Angela continued, "The trust has been professionally managed under your grandfather's instructions. Until today, however, we had never successfully made contact with the beneficiary." I frowned. "What do you mean you've never contacted me? Our records show multiple notifications over the years. Every one of them was either returned or challenged during the estate proceedings." Estate proceedings. Those two words ripped me straight back to 8 years earlier. I was standing outside my father's house after my grandfather's funeral. Garbage bags filled with my belongings sat on the front lawn. My father, Richard Mercer, stood in the doorway without a hint of sympathy. "You've lived off this family long enough. I wasn't asking for anything, and you won't be getting anything either." "What are you talking about? Harold left you nothing." My younger brother, Thomas, leaned against his brand-new pickup with his arms crossed. "You heard, Dad. I don't have anywhere else to go. Not our problem." I remember lifting one of Linda's photo albums out of the wet grass before loading everything I owned into an old trailer. What stayed with me the most wasn't leaving. It was believing every word they said. Back in Mr. Henderson's office, I looked down and realized my hands were trembling. Then Angela spoke again, her voice softer than before. "Before you make a single decision, we strongly recommend hiring an experienced estate attorney," Angela said. Can I actually see it?" Mr. Henderson turned his monitor toward me. There it was in black and white. Harold Mercer Irrevocable Trust. Lifetime beneficiary, David Allen Mercer. Estimated value, $41,834,792. I didn't feel like a millionaire. I felt like someone who'd just discovered 8 years of his life had been stolen. 8 birthdays. 5 wedding anniversaries without Linda. 3 months, wondering if I'd lose my home. Countless nights lying awake, deciding which bill could wait and which one couldn't. Repairs I ignored because there wasn't enough money. Mr. Henderson finally broke the silence. "Mr. Mercer?" "Yes?" He leaned back slowly. "I've worked in banking for 32 years, and I've never seen anything like this." Neither had I. When I walked back to my old Ford Escape, the foreclosure notice was still folded inside my jacket. Only now, it felt heavier than before, because I finally understood that someone hadn't simply kept an inheritance from me. They'd taken 8 years I could never get back. Every instinct told me to drive straight to my father's house, throw the trust statement in his face, and ask one question: why? Instead, I drove home. Looking back, that decision probably saved me from making the biggest mistake of the entire ordeal. Anger has a way of convincing you that acting first is the same as acting wisely. It rarely is. I barely slept that night. The trust statement sat on my kitchen table beside a stack of overdue bills. Every few hours, I'd walk over, read my own name again, then stare at the number as if it might suddenly disappear. It never did. $41 million. Enough to solve every problem I'd been carrying for years. Yet the number only made the pain worse. Every memory from the past 8 years came back with the same haunting question: what if? What if I'd known? Would Linda have spent her final months worrying about hospital bills? Would I have sold her wedding ring to pay for treatments our insurance refused to cover? Would she have the headstone she deserved instead of the temporary marker I could barely afford? Before the sun came up, I made myself one promise. I wasn't spending a single dollar until I knew exactly what had happened. The next morning, I called the attorney Mr. Henderson had recommended. His name was Robert Vance, an estate litigation lawyer in Kansas City, about 3 hours north of Springfield. When his receptionist heard my name, she caught me completely off guard. Mr. Vance has been expecting your call. Expecting me? Your bank contacted him yesterday after you signed the authorization forms. I'd completely forgotten about the paperwork before leaving the bank. She scheduled me for the following morning. The drive to Kansas City felt longer than 3 hours. Interstate 49 stretched endlessly ahead while the radio stayed off. Linda used to tell me, "Silence gives your heart time to catch up with your mind." Mine had 8 years to catch up on. Robert Vance looked exactly like the kind of attorney people instinctively trusted. Gray hair, navy suit, reading glasses resting low on his nose. His office wasn't flashy. Law books filled the shelves, framed degrees hung beside old family photographs, and everything looked used instead of displayed. He greeted me with a firm handshake. "I'm sorry we're meeting under circumstances like these." "So am I." Once I sat down, he opened a thick case file. "I spent most of yesterday reviewing the records your bank forwarded." He slid several documents across the desk before nodding toward his assistant. "We're both going to need some coffee." A moment later, 2 steaming mugs were sitting between us. He tapped the first page. "The good news is that the trust is completely legitimate." I finally let out the breath I'd been holding. Then he folded his hands together. "The bad news." He paused just long enough for my stomach to tighten. "The trust was never hidden." "What do you mean it wasn't hidden?" I asked. Robert Vance met my eyes. "Because it was administered exactly the way your grandfather instructed." That answer only confused me more. "Then why didn't I know it even existed?" "Because something happened after your grandfather passed away." He opened another file and turned it toward me. "This is the probate record." The paperwork was nearly 8 years old. My stomach dropped the moment I read the name at the top. Richard Allen Mercer. My father. Vance pointed to another line. "As executor of the estate, your father had a legal obligation to notify every beneficiary. I never received a single notice." "I know." "Then how is that possible?" He slid another document across the desk. "Because this is where the story changes." It was a certified mail receipt showing the trust documents had supposedly been delivered to me. At the bottom was a signature. Mine, at least, that's what it claimed. I stared at it for several seconds before shaking my head. "That's not my signature." "I didn't think so either," Vance replied. He reached for another page. This envelope was mailed to an address in Springfield. I recognized it immediately. An apartment I'd moved out of nearly 6 years before my grandfather died. I wasn't living there. I know. Then who changed my address? We don't know yet. But someone filed paperwork claiming it was your current residence. I rubbed my forehead as the pieces started falling into place. So every letter went somewhere I hadn't lived in for years. Exactly. That can't possibly be legal. It isn't. For the next hour, Vance walked me through the entire probate timeline. On the surface, everything looked routine. My grandfather passed away. The estate entered probate. The trust became active. Every beneficiary was notified except me. Each time the court requested proof that I'd been contacted, another affidavit appeared in the file. Whenever certified mail came back, there was always another explanation. Unable to locate. No forwarding address. Beneficiary unavailable. On paper, everything looked perfectly reasonable. Only the truth told a different story. Then Vance opened another folder. This is what finally raised concerns. Inside were records from the bank's trust department. Every single year they had tried to contact me. Every single year those attempts failed. "Why didn't anyone come looking for me?" I asked. "Because they trusted the executor, my father." He nodded. "He represented that you couldn't be located." I let out a bitter laugh. "I've lived in Springfield my entire life. I know. My driver's license has always been current. I know. I've paid property taxes every year. I know. My Social Security records never stopped. I know." He let the silence linger, before speaking again. "Which leaves one unavoidable question. If you were that easy to find, why did no one ever find you?" Neither of us answered. We didn't have to. Someone had gone out of their way to make sure nobody looked too closely. After a long pause, Vance opened one final folder. "Now let's talk about your grandfather's estate. I expected to see a modest farm, a few savings accounts, maybe some investments. Instead, I uncovered the story of a man I realized I'd never truly known. Back in the early 1990s, Harold Mercer quietly leased the mineral rights beneath sections of the family farmland. Years later, renewable energy companies installed wind turbines across hundreds of acres. Rather than spending the royalties, he invested nearly every dollar. Blue chip stocks, dividend funds, municipal bonds. He almost never talked about money, so everyone assumed he was simply an aging farmer living a quiet life. In reality, he'd built an extraordinary fortune, while almost no one outside a small circle of professionals had any idea how wealthy he had become. "He meant all of this? For me?" I asked quietly. Robert Vance nodded. "He amended the trust twice before he died. He handed me the final amendment. It wasn't written in legal language. It was written in my grandfather's own hand. David never asked me for anything. He showed up when everyone else was too busy. Character matters more than blood." I couldn't keep looking at the page. Memories came rushing back, changing Grandpa Harold's oxygen tank, driving him to doctor's appointments, sitting beside him through Cardinals games while he insisted he was still awake, even after drifting off in his chair. I never did any of it expecting a reward. He was my grandfather. That was reason enough. After a long silence, I finally asked the question that had been burning inside me since I walked into the bank. "My father did all this?" Vance answered carefully. "I don't believe he acted alone." I looked up. "What do you mean?" He flipped to another section of the file. Different handwriting. Different initials. The paperwork becomes much more sophisticated after the first few months. Whoever handled these filings understood the legal system. "Thomas?" I asked, thinking of my younger brother. Vance paused before answering. "I don't make accusations without evidence." Then he met my eyes. I'd rather prove it than guess. As our meeting ended, he left me with one instruction. "Go home. That's it. Live exactly the way you've been living." "Why?" "Because they'll notice if you suddenly disappear. They'll notice if you suddenly start spending money." I sighed. "So I pretend none of this happened. For now." I nodded slowly. "I've already waited 8 years. I guess I can wait a little longer." "You won't be waiting," he said as he closed the file. "We'll be building a case." The drive back to Springfield felt nothing like the drive there. Not because I had all the answers, but because I finally understood the truth. Whoever stole my inheritance hadn't just hidden money. They'd built an entire life around a lie. And lies that big don't collapse in a single day. They break apart one crack at a time. 4 months passed without a single word from my family. No phone calls, no letters, not even one awkward holiday message pretending we were still relatives. Robert Vance wasn't surprised. "As long as they believe you're still the same man they threw away," he told me one afternoon, "they'll keep acting naturally." So I did exactly that. I took a part-time maintenance job at a small Baptist church on the south side of Springfield. The pay wasn't much, but it covered groceries and gave me a reason to get up every morning. I fixed leaking faucets, replaced light fixtures, patched drywall, and mowed the lawn every Thursday before the preschool children arrived. Nobody cared how old I was. They only cared that when something broke, I knew how to fix it. That was enough. The trust remained untouched. Legally, I could have accessed the money whenever I wanted, but I refused. Robert quietly arranged a temporary loan against the trust, so I could stop the foreclosure without revealing its true value, and that was the only change in my life. I still drove my old Ford Escape. I still bought coffee at Casey's every morning. I still clipped coupons from the Sunday paper. Some days I caught myself wondering if I was losing my mind. I was worth more than $41 million, yet I still stood in grocery aisles comparing canned soup prices between Walmart and Hy-Vee. Then, late one afternoon in September, I found a cream-colored envelope waiting in my mailbox. Thick cardstock, gold lettering, my full name written in elegant script. Inside was a wedding invitation. "Emma Mercer and Daniel Collins request the honor of your presence." Emma, my brother, Thomas's daughter. The last time I'd seen her, she was 16, giving me a small wave from across a church parking lot while her father looked the other way and pretended I wasn't there. Tucked inside the invitation was a handwritten note. "We hope you'll come. Families should be together for special occasions." There was no signature, no apology, no explanation. Just one word: family. I almost laughed. For 8 years, I hadn't been family to any of them. Now, all of a sudden, I was. The next morning, I drove back to Kansas City and handed the invitation to Robert Vance. He read it twice before a small smile crossed his face. I was hoping they'd do something like this. You call this good news? I call it predictable. I shook my head. I don't want to play games. I know. He leaned back in his chair. Answer me this. If they knew you had control of the trust, would they have invited you? Not a chance. Exactly. He carefully folded the invitation and slid it back across the desk. They're comfortable. Comfortable people get careless. I don't care about catching them off guard, I said. I just want the truth. And you'll get it. He paused before adding, but this wedding could give us something even more valuable. What's that? Witnesses. That single word stayed with me the entire drive home. 3 weeks later, I found myself at a country club just outside Branson, about 45 minutes south of Springfield. It was the kind of place my grandfather would have hated: too polished, too expensive, and far too concerned with appearances. I parked my faded Ford Escape between a brand new Mercedes SUV and a black Porsche Cayenne. The contrast couldn't have been more obvious. Before going inside, I caught my reflection in the window. Navy sport coat, white dress shirt, the same brown shoes I'd polished the night before. The elbows of my jacket had begun to shine with age, but it was the best I had. Inside, soft piano music drifted through the ballroom beneath crystal chandeliers while servers floated through the crowd carrying shrimp cocktails and sparkling drinks. I recognized nearly every face in the room. Aunts, uncles, cousins, people who had spent years pretending I no longer existed. Some forced polite smiles, others quickly looked away. Then I heard a familiar voice. Well, I'll be. My younger brother, Thomas, walked over wearing an expensive charcoal suit and a smile that never reached his eyes. David, you actually made it. I was invited, he chuckled. Honestly, I wasn't sure you'd spend the gas money. A few guests nearby let out uncomfortable laughs. I smiled back. Funny, I wasn't sure you'd spend this much on the venue. His smile tightened for the briefest moment before returning. Business has been treating me well. I'm glad to hear it. He gave my shoulder a quick pat. Help yourself to the buffet. Don't worry, I will. He walked away as casually as he'd arrived, but something felt different. For the first time in years, I caught a crack in his confidence. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Emma looked genuinely happy, and watching her reminded me of Linda. She used to cry at weddings, even when she didn't know the couple. She'd squeeze my hand and whisper, "Don't you dare make fun of me." I smiled before I even realized I was doing it. During the reception, an older woman quietly took the empty seat beside me. It took me a moment to recognize her. Aunt Carol, Grandpa Harold's youngest sister. She leaned in and studied my face. You've got his eyes. I smiled politely. People have said that before. She slowly shook her head. No, I mean today. I frowned. What do you mean? She glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then lowered her voice. The week before your grandfather died, he came looking for you. Everything around me seemed to disappear. I turned toward her. What? The week before he died, your grandfather asked Thomas where you were, Aunt Carol said quietly. My heartbeat sped up. Thomas told him you wanted nothing to do with this family anymore. I couldn't say a word. Carol lowered her eyes. Harold cried. She paused, her voice breaking. I'd never seen my brother cry before. My chest tightened. He believed Thomas? She nodded. He was already so sick. He truly believed you'd walked away from him. The words hit harder than anything I'd ever experienced. For years, I'd convinced myself Grandpa never asked about me. The truth was far worse. He had been searching for me, and someone had made sure we'd never see each other again. Carol gently squeezed my hand. I've wanted to tell you this for years. Why didn't you? She looked down, ashamed. I was afraid. Before I could respond, applause rolled across the ballroom. My father, Richard, stood at the microphone. He looked older than I remembered. His hair had turned almost completely white, but the confidence in his voice hadn't changed. Family is everything, he began. I nearly laughed. Everything we've built came from hard work, honesty, and standing together. 3 lies in a single sentence. The room erupted in applause. Moments later, Thomas stepped beside him to offer a toast. As he raised his champagne glass, something caught the light. A gold pocket watch. I recognized it instantly. Grandpa Harold carried that watch to church every Sunday. When I was a boy, he'd let me wind it before the service. I hadn't seen it since his funeral. I could still hear his voice. "One day, I want you to have this." Now it rested comfortably in Thomas's vest pocket as if it had always belonged there. Every instinct told me to march across the room and take it back. My fists tightened until my knuckles turned white. Then Robert Vance's words echoed in my mind. Not yet. Truth first. Anger last. I slowly relaxed my hands. Thomas noticed me staring at the watch. He smiled, then deliberately slipped it deeper into his pocket. He knew exactly what he was doing. After dinner, I picked up my jacket and headed for the exit. I was only a few steps from the doors when my father's voice stopped me. "Leaving already?" I turned. "I've got an early morning." He nodded. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I looked him straight in the eye. "Enjoy tonight." His smile faded. "What does that mean?" I kept my voice calm. The truth has a way of showing up when people least expect it. Before he could answer, I walked out. It was a little after 11 when I pulled into my driveway. As I reached the front porch, something caught my eye. A plain white envelope rested against the front door. No stamp, no return address. Inside was a single brass key with a small tag attached. Safe deposit box, 311, Ozark Federal Savings. Nothing else. No note, no signature. I stood under the porch light, turning the key over in my hand. Someone knew the truth, and someone had just handed me the next piece of it. I didn't sleep that night. The brass key sat beside my coffee mug on the kitchen table, glinting every time I walked past. One key, one box number, no explanation. At exactly 8 o'clock the next morning, I called Robert Vance. "I think you need to come to Springfield," I said. He listened without interrupting as I described the envelope and the key. When I finished, the line went silent for several seconds. Then he spoke. "Don't go there alone. Do you think it's important?" I asked. Robert Vance looked at the brass key for a moment before answering. "I think someone took a serious risk to get this into your hands." "So you think it's a trap?" He shook his head. "After everything we've uncovered, we don't assume anything anymore." By 11 o'clock that morning, we were standing inside the downtown branch of Ozark Federal Savings. It was one of those old-fashioned banks with marble floors, polished brass railings, and the kind of quiet that made every footstep echo. A woman in her 60s greeted us with a polite smile. "Good morning. How can I help you?" Vance slid his business card across the counter. "My client has reason to believe he's the lawful owner of Safe Deposit Box 311. She examined the key, then looked at me. "One moment, please." 15 minutes later, after checking my driver's license, social security number, and the probate documents Vance had brought, she returned, carrying a thick, leather-bound ledger. "I've worked here 26 years, she said softly. "I've never opened this box." "Never?" I asked. She shook her head. "The rental fees have always been paid automatically through a trust account." My pulse quickened. She led us into the vault. The air smelled of cold steel and aging paper. She unlocked the outer mechanism, then stepped aside. I slid the brass key into the lock. A soft click echoed through the room. She quietly left us alone. The metal box was heavier than I expected. I carried it to a small wooden table, while Vance stood beside me without saying a word. Finally, he nodded. "Whenever you're ready." I lifted the lid. Inside were only 4 items. A thick manila envelope, a leather-bound journal, a small digital voice recorder, and a gold pocket watch. I froze. "That's Grandpa Harold's watch." Vance frowned. "That can't be possible." I picked it up carefully. Near the winding crown was a tiny scratch. I'd put it there when I was 12 after dropping the watch on the concrete floor of Grandpa's garage. Instead of getting angry, he laughed and told me that every scratch gave an old watch another story to tell. I slowly looked at Vance. "This is the original." He stared at the watch, then back at me. "Then the one your brother wore." was a fake. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to fool everyone. My hands trembled as I opened the manila envelope. Inside was the original trust agreement. Not a copy, the original. Every page carried embossed seals, original signatures, and notarizations, exactly as they had been filed years ago. Nothing had been changed. Beneath it lay a second envelope with my name written in Grandpa Harold's unmistakable handwriting. For David. Open only if I cannot tell you myself. I swallowed hard before breaking the seal. The letter was only 3 pages long. David, if you're reading this, then things did not happen the way I hoped they would. I asked Mr. Reynolds to make sure this trust protected you after I was gone. I also instructed him to make certain that no one, not even my own children, could change what belonged to you. I stopped reading and looked up. Who's Mr. Reynolds? Vance searched through the trust documents. The original trustee. What happened to him? He turned another page. He retired 6 months after your grandfather passed away. I looked back at the letter. Son, I'm not leaving this to you because of money. I'm leaving it to you because you stayed. You never asked me for $1. You gave me your weekends. You fixed my fence. You drove me to every doctor's appointment. That's what matters. My vision blurred. Linda used to tease me every Saturday morning when I left to help Grandpa. You spoil that old man, she'd laugh. I just hope somebody spoils me when I'm 90. I smiled through tears. She never got the chance. Then I reached the final paragraph. If Richard ever tells you I forgot about you, don't believe him. The vault fell completely silent. Robert Vance quietly picked up the digital voice recorder. Ready? He asked. I nodded. He pressed the play button. A burst of static filled the room. Then I heard a voice I hadn't heard in 8 years. Thin, weak, older than I remembered, but unmistakably my grandfather's. My name is Harold Mercer. I closed my eyes. Hearing his voice again almost took the air out of my lungs. If you're listening to this, he paused to cough. Then something has gone terribly wrong. There was another long silence before he spoke again. I've been warned that families sometimes fall apart when money enters the picture. A tired chuckle escaped him. I pray mine never does. He drew a slow breath. David, just hearing him say my name nearly broke me. You've always believed a man's word means something. I hope you never lose that. But if anyone ever tells you I changed my mind, they're lying. The recording ended with one final sentence. I love you, son. That was it. No dramatic farewell. No grand speech. Just an old farmer telling his grandson he loved him. I don't remember when the tears started. I only remember Robert Vance quietly placing a handkerchief beside me and waiting without saying a word. After several minutes, he finally broke the silence. This changes everything. I looked up. How? Because we no longer have to prove what your grandfather wanted. He carefully gathered the documents back into neat stacks. We have something even stronger. What's that? Original evidence that was never presented during probate. Before we left the vault, the bank manager hurried toward us. Mr. Mercer, there's one more thing. She handed Vance an old signature card from the safe deposit box records. It was the access log. Only 3 names had ever entered safe deposit box 311. Harold Mercer, attorney James Reynolds, and Thomas Mercer. I stared at the date beside my brother's name. 6 weeks after Grandpa died. My stomach sank. He knew, I whispered. Vance looked at the log for a long moment. He knew this box existed. He paused. Or he came here looking for something and couldn't find it. Either possibility was devastating. That same afternoon, Vance filed an emergency motion with the Greene County Circuit Court. Less than 48 hours later, the judge approved temporary injunctions, freezing dozens of business assets connected to Richard and Thomas Mercer. For the first time in 8 years, neither of them could move a single dollar without court approval. The hearing was set for 3 weeks later. News spread across Springfield faster than I expected. By the morning of the hearing, reporters from KY3 and the Springfield News Leader were already waiting outside the courthouse. Inside, my father looked furious. Thomas looked nervous. The moment they saw me walk in beside Robert Vance, neither of them smiled. They finally understood something had changed. They just had no idea how much. As the judge entered the courtroom, Vance leaned toward me. Whatever happens today, I turned to him. Tell the truth. I nodded. For 8 years, my life had been shaped by lies. It was finally time to find out what the truth could accomplish. The courtroom was already packed when the judge took the bench. I recognized faces everywhere, old neighbors, former coworkers, distant relatives, even members of my church who had quietly taken seats in the back after hearing about the case. The room stayed almost completely silent, except for the rustle of paperwork and the steady hum of the air conditioner. Across the aisle sat my father. Richard Mercer looked smaller than I remembered, not because he'd aged, but because, for the first time in my life, he looked like a man who knew he wasn't in control anymore. Beside him, Thomas sat in a perfectly tailored navy suit that probably cost more than my old Ford Escape. His foot bounced relentlessly beneath the table. Fast, restless, nervous. Robert Vance leaned toward me one last time. "Remember," he whispered, "today isn't about revenge. It's about the truth." I nodded. Over the past few months, those words had become the one thing keeping me grounded. Anger burns hot. The truth lasts longer. The judge adjusted his glasses and looked down at the case file. This hearing concerns allegations of fraud, forgery, breach of fiduciary duty, and concealment during the administration of an estate. His tone was calm, almost ordinary, but every word carried enormous weight. Robert Vance rose first. He didn't dramatize a single fact. He simply laid out the timeline. Harold Mercer established an irrevocable trust. I was named its sole lifetime beneficiary. Richard Mercer accepted the legal responsibility of serving as executor. Then came the notifications, or at least the notifications that were supposed to reach me. One by one, certified mail records appeared on the courtroom monitors. Every envelope had been mailed to addresses where I'd never lived. Every affidavit claiming I couldn't be found unraveled under careful examination. A handwriting expert testified that the signature, accepting one of the certified letters, was not mine. The original notary journal matched the trust documents perfectly. The trust itself had never been altered. Only the paperwork surrounding me had. The judge listened closely, interrupting only when he wanted clarification. Next, Vance called Angela Brooks from the trust department. I recognized her voice before she even introduced herself. She explained that the trust had operated exactly as my grandfather intended from the day it was created. The beneficiary was never removed, she testified. The assets remained invested, and annual attempts were made to contact Mr. Mercer in accordance with trust policy. Vance asked the question everyone was waiting for. "Then why was Mr. Mercer never located?" Angela answered without hesitation. "Because every official inquiry relied on the executor's filings and the addresses submitted during probate. In other words, they trusted my father." The courtroom fell silent. Then Vance introduced Grandpa Harold's letter into evidence. The judge read it quietly before approving key portions for the record. No objections, no arguments, just silence. Finally, Vance held up the digital voice recorder. "Your Honor, this recording was recovered from Safe Deposit Box 311 alongside the original trust documents." He pressed play. My grandfather's voice echoed through the courtroom. Older, frail, unmistakably honest. "If anyone ever tells you I changed my mind, they're lying." When the recording ended, no one moved. Even the court reporter paused for a brief moment before continuing to type. Then something happened that no one seemed to expect. My father slowly stood. His attorney reached out to stop him, but Richard pulled his arm away. "I'd like to say something." The judge nodded. Richard looked toward me. "I never wanted David to suffer." Those words should have meant something. Instead, they sounded hollow. "I made mistakes." "Mistakes?" Vance asked quietly. Richard lowered his eyes. "I trusted the wrong person." Every head in the courtroom turned toward Thomas. He shot to his feet. "Don't do this." Richard didn't look at him. "You handled the paperwork. You told me everything was legal." Thomas's face flushed bright red. "You signed every document." Richard shook his head. "Because you said no?" Thomas slammed both hands onto the counsel table so hard the sound echoed through the courtroom. "You wanted everything." The room went completely still. The instant the words left his mouth, Thomas realized what he'd admitted. His attorney slowly closed his notebook and stood. "Your Honor," he said carefully, I'd like to request a brief recess to confer with my client. The judge granted a 15-minute break. Outside the courtroom, reporters rushed toward anyone willing to speak. Cameras turned. Microphones appeared from every direction. I stayed where I was, leaning quietly against the hallway wall, watching the chaos unfold. A few moments later, Robert Vance walked over and stopped beside me. Robert Vance stopped beside me in the hallway. "How are you holding up?" I thought about it for a moment. "I honestly don't know." He studied my face. "You expected to feel better." I nodded. "I expected to feel something. Instead, I just feel tired." Carrying 8 years of anger had become exhausting. When court reconvened, Thomas's attorney immediately stood and filed a motion to withdraw from the case, citing an irreparable conflict that had surfaced during testimony. The judge took the request under advisement and ordered it entered into the record. For the first time all day, Thomas no longer looked confident. He looked scared. After that, everything moved quickly. Financial investigators traced business loans that had been secured using estate assets. Bank records followed the money through several failed companies Thomas controlled. Emails revealed discussions about delaying notification until David gives up. There were no dramatic surprises, just spreadsheets, receipts, wire transfers, signatures. Sometimes the biggest lies are buried in ordinary paperwork. By late afternoon, the judge announced his preliminary findings. The civil claims would move forward. The estate would be restored exactly as the trust required. Separate criminal investigations into forgery and fraud would continue. My father lowered his head. Thomas stared straight ahead. Neither of them looked in my direction. As people began filing out of the courtroom, the judge called my name. "Mr. Mercer." "Yes, Your Honor." He held up my grandfather's letter. I read this twice. So did I. A faint smile crossed his face. "I believe your grandfather would be proud of the way you've handled yourself." I thanked him and quietly walked outside. Reporters rushed toward me from every direction. "Mr. Mercer, do you have a statement? How do you feel after today's hearing?" I stopped only once. For years I believed money would have fixed my life. They waited for more. I was wrong. I glanced back at the courthouse behind me. What finally changed my life was learning the truth. Then I kept walking. The legal battle continued for nearly another year. Richard eventually accepted responsibility for failing his duties as executor. As investigators uncovered more evidence, Thomas pleaded guilty to multiple fraud-related charges. Several of his business properties were sold to satisfy outstanding judgments. Through it all, my grandfather's trust remained exactly as he designed it. As for me, I never bought a mansion. I never bought a sports car. I never left Springfield. I paid off my mortgage, replaced the leaking roof, repaired the laundry room, and finally gave Linda the granite headstone she'd deserved all along. One crisp October morning, I stood beside her grave and gently ran my hand across her name. "I'm sorry it took me so long," I whispered. The wind stirred the trees above the cemetery, and for the first time in years, I walked away without carrying guilt on my shoulders. I also created the Harold Mercer Technical Scholarship at Ozarks Technical Community College, helping students pursuing careers in welding, electrical work, HVAC, maintenance, and the skilled trades that built families like ours. I bought myself a new Ford F-150. Nothing extravagant, just a dependable truck that spends most days hauling lumber and supplies to the community farm we started on Grandpa's old land. People sometimes ask why I still shop at the same grocery store, drink coffee at Casey's every morning, and live in the same modest house. The answer has never changed. Money changed what I could afford. It never changed the man I wanted to be. A few months ago, I visited Grandpa Harold's grave carrying his old gold pocket watch. I wound it carefully and listened as it ticked in the quiet afternoon. Steady, patient, faithful, just like the man who'd carried it for so many years. "I hope I did right by you," I said softly. The only answer was the breeze moving through the trees. Somehow that was enough. People often think revenge is watching someone else lose everything. I've learned it's something far quieter. It's refusing to become the person who hurt you. It's choosing peace after life gives you every reason to choose bitterness instead. If this story reminded you that the truth may take years to arrive, but is always worth fighting for, thank you for spending your time with me today. And never take for granted the people who stand beside you when life is at its hardest, because they're worth far more than anything money can ever buy.